He thought the war ended 20 years ago, but one package proved it never really did. Inside, no name, no letter, just a photo of 3 soldiers, a rusted knife, and a newspaper about a missing man. His loyal German shepherd, Rex, sensed something buried deep in the woods of Vermont. When Jack followed his dog into the mist, he didn't find peace, he found the truth they tried to erase. A truth about loyalty, guilt, and the mercy of God that can't stay buried forever. If you believe that faith and truth can still bring light to the darkest memories, hit subscribe. Leave your prayer in the comments, and share this story so others can feel the miracle too. Because sometimes, the quietest miracles come from the loudest pain. The wind came down off the Green Mountains like a low growl, shouldering through the maples and rattling the tin roof of the last cabin on County Road 12, a narrow lane that marked the edge of Grey Ridge, Vermont. It was late autumn, the kind that forgets to invite the sun. A metal sky pressed close to the treetops, and the cold had the hard, honest feel of a country that did not care whether a man dragged old ghosts behind him. Jack Miller stood on his porch, hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug, watching his breath twist into little storms. He was 62 and built like the barn beams he'd spent the past year replacing. Thick-shouldered, the tendons in his forearms like cables, the right wrist stiff from a break that never healed straight. His face had the rugged geometry of men who've slept more years outside than in. A square jaw, a nose that bent slightly to the left from a long-ago fight. Cheekbones that gave his eyes a shadowed, watchful look. White stubble roughened his jaw and throat, not so much a beard as a permanent winter of whiskers. A pale seam of scar tissue cut through his left eyebrow and nicked the brow ridge, a souvenir from a Humvee door he hadn't ducked fast enough. People in town, when they tried, called him polite if distant. Jack returned hellos with a nod, bought his coffee and feed with cash, and never sat with his back to a door. That habit, like many others, came free with the years he'd served as a military policeman in places where the horizon was always on fire. Beside him sat Rex, an 8-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat that shifted from smoke to bronze in the weakest light. Rex's chest was broad and deep, the legs square and balanced under him, a working dog's build that could hold a line and take a hit. One ear was nicked near the tip, a thin white scar tracing the outer edge like a stitch. His eyes were amber, steady, with the patient intelligence of an animal who had learned to read a man's pulse by the way he stood. He wore a wide leather collar embossed with a faded serial number from his service days and obeyed in 2 languages, voice and silence. Off the porch, frost powdered the grass like ground glass, and the birches along the driveway tapped their white fingers together in the wind. When the postal jeep creaked to a stop at the end of the lane, Jack raised his mug in a half-salute to the driver. Sarah Whitman, mid-50s, apple-cheeked even in the cold, her gray braid looped through the back of a navy cap. Sarah had the sturdy, cheerful competence of small-town people who kept everything moving, mail, gossip, casseroles for funerals, because they knew what happened to places where nothing moved. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and who sat in the 3rd pew at the white church on the hill, singing harmony. "Got something odd for you, Jack," she called, voice flattened by the wind. "No return address. Came in on the overnight from Burlington Hub. You want me to mark it as received?" Jack set the mug on the rail and walked down the steps, boots grinding the thin crust of ice. Up close, Sarah smelled like wool and peppermint. She held a brown parcel wrapped with ordinary tape. Too ordinary, Jack thought. Whoever sealed it had run the strip 3 times around the edges, carefully pinching the corners to neat, sharp kills. The label was typed, not printed, the kind of old electric type that hit the paper like little hammers. Jack Miller, County Road 12, Gray Ridge, VT 05741, no return, no postmark beyond the sorting code, no fingerprints that time would allow a man to see. "Mark it," Jack said, taking the weight of it. Light, but not empty. He waited for the prickle that sometimes rose at the base of his skull when a thing wasn't right. Nothing, only the wind and a dog, and the sense that something had aimed itself at his front door and arrived. Sarah's eyes skated over his shoulder toward Rex, who was watching her with the polite suspicion only working dogs have. "He's getting gray around the muzzle," she said. "Still faster than me," Jack replied, giving a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sarah nodded, then climbed back into her Jeep. The vehicle coughed to life and rattled away down the frozen track until only the echo of chains on tires was left. Jack turned the parcel in his hands once, twice, feeling the hidden weight shift like memory under the paper. He carried it inside, where the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee grounds. On the table near the window lay a half-carved piece of oak, something that might have become a bird if he'd had the patience, and a framed photo of a younger Jack in uniform, a woman's arm looped through his. He avoided looking at it. He took a pocket knife from the counter and slit the tape. The smell came first, a dry metallic tang, like old pennies left in rain. Inside lay 3 objects arranged with care. A black and white photograph of 3 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces half-shadowed by the glare of desert sun. A military knife, standard issue, the handle scored by years of grip, the blade etched with the single letter M, and a folded newspaper dated October 7th, 1999, yellowed and soft. The headline shouting from another lifetime. "Local man missing in Maple Creek Woods." Jack stared at the items. His heart slowed to the old rhythm it took in firefights, measured, distant, waiting. Rex stood up, tail stiff, nose twitching. He circled the table, then whined softly, ears flat. Jack lowered the photo closer to the lamplight. The man on the left was young, sharp jaw, crew-cut, eyes half-closed in laughter. The middle one wore sunglasses. The third, broad shoulders, squared stance, had Jack's face, only younger, stronger, before the tremor had started in his right hand. Rex barked suddenly, the sound cutting through the room like a bullet. He ran to the door, pawing at it, nostrils flaring. Jack followed, opening it to the gray world outside. The wind carried the scent of rain and something deeper. Smoke? Soil turned? Rex trotted in circles, nose to the ground, whining. "What is it, boy?" Jack muttered. His own chest felt tight, a pressure behind his ribs, as though the air had turned too heavy to breathe. He crouched, the photograph still in his hand. The image blurred, then sharpened again. A flash of something hit his mind. The crack of rifle fire, a man shouting his name, then the blinding light of an explosion. And then, nothing but black. The photo trembled between his fingers. He turned it over, finding a faint inscription written in pencil. "To J.M. Never forget who we were." Jack closed his eyes, the paper trembling against the old scar on his thumb. Rex pressed against his knee, whining low, eyes fixed on the dark trees beyond the porch. Jack looked again at the photograph, his own face staring back at him from 20 years ago, and whispered, "But who the hell were we?" The morning after the parcel arrived, the sky wore the same color as tin, and the frost had thickened into a white crust over the meadow. Jack Miller hadn't slept much. He sat at his kitchen table staring at the photo again, the three soldiers frozen forever in the heat of some distant desert. The name Maple Creek from the newspaper headline kept echoing in his head, beating against the walls of his memory like a loose shutter. Rex lay near the wood stove, restless, ears twitching at every sound. When the dog suddenly stood up and barked toward the door, Jack felt the same pull inside him, a direction, a knowing. "You want to go?" he murmured. Rex gave a short, decisive whine, tail stiff. Jack put on his old green field jacket, the patches faded to ghosts, slung his camera bag over his shoulder, and whistled softly. The dog was already at the truck. The road to Maple Creek twisted through birch forest, the fog sitting low, thick as smoke. The wipers beat slow across the windshield, and each mile felt like a step deeper into something half-remembered. The truck's heater blew out air that smelled of dust and engine oil, and the silence inside the cab was alive with what Jack wasn't saying. After 30 minutes, the dirt track narrowed until branches scraped both sides, and the sign, faded white letters, read, "Maple Creek Trailhead, no trespassing. Jack killed the engine." "Stay close," he said, and Rex leapt out, paws crunching the frost. The woods there were different, old, heavier. The trunks of the pines were blackened near the base, as though a fire had come through once and decided to stay. The air was damp, thick with the scent of earth and rot. As they walked, the fog began to thin, revealing the skeleton of a house in the distance. Its roof collapsed on one side, a chimney leaning like an old soldier who'd lost his balance. Jack stopped at the edge of the clearing. The boards were gray and furred with moss. The windows shattered long ago. A metal mailbox lay rusted in the weeds. The letters D. Harris faintly visible under the corrosion. The name made his stomach twist. "Harris," he whispered. He hadn't thought that name in years. Inside, the air smelled of ash and mildew. Half the floor was gone, eaten by time. The rest was covered in damp leaves. Jack crouched, touching the ground. There, near the corner, glimmered something metallic. He brushed away the dirt to reveal a single bullet casing, green with corrosion. Nearby, claw marks raked across the wall, deep, frantic, as if someone had tried to dig their way out. Rex prowled the perimeter, nose low, tail down. He gave a sharp bark near a pile of charred timber, then started pawing. Jack knelt beside him, pulling the boards apart. Behind them, nailed to the wall, was a small, half-burned wooden sign, D. Harris. His heart thudded once, hard. Harris had been his unit partner in a domestic protection mission, years after the war, guarding a whistleblower who'd vanished. The mission had gone bad. Gunfire, fire, then nothing. His memory of that night was blank after the explosion. As he stood, a wave of dizziness hit him. Flash of light, smell of gasoline, someone shouting his name. He gripped the doorway until the vision faded. The dog whined softly, pressing against his leg. "I'm fine," Jack lied, his voice thin. He looked toward the far wall where the wallpaper hung in strips. A dark line caught his eye, something buried in the wood. He crossed the room, prying loose the rotted paneling. A blade's hilt protruded from the beam, sunk deep. Jack's breath hitched. The knife was military issue. Same handle pattern, same wear. He gripped it and pulled. The wood gave with a dry crack, and there it was. The twin of the knife from the parcel, rusted but unmistakable. He turned it in the gray light, reading the faint engraving near the guard. M. The same mark. Rex's ears flattened. The dog paced, uneasy, as if he sensed something alive in the silence. Jack backed away, staring at the blade in his hand, the fog curling around the doorway. He looked again at the broken walls, the bullet casing, the nameplate. Whoever had sent that parcel wanted him here, to find this. But why? Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a smell of smoke that wasn't from the house. Rex barked, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the tree line. Jack followed his gaze but saw only gray mist. A cold certainty ran down his spine. Someone had been here recently. Someone was watching to see what he would remember. Jack slipped the knife into his coat pocket, gave one last look at the ruin that had once been Harris's house, and whispered, "What the hell happened to us?" The next day dawned gray and wet, the kind of morning when fog slid down the hills like slow smoke. Jack Miller sat in his truck outside the Gray Ridge Sheriff's office, watching rain pool on the hood. He'd been there for 10 minutes, long enough for Rex to grow restless in the passenger seat. The dog's nose pressed against the glass, fogging a circle as he huffed. Jack rubbed the scar on his eyebrow, the one that always itched when old memories tried to crawl out. He had the knife in his pocket, the name Harris echoing like a pulse. He needed answers, and there was only one man in town who kept the records that could tell him what really happened at Maple Creek. The door creaked as he entered the sheriff's office. The smell hit first: coffee gone bitter, gun oil, and the faint scent of wet uniforms drying near the heater. Behind a cluttered desk sat Sheriff Calvin Collins, a man built like an oak stump, thick in the shoulders and neck, with hair the color of steel shavings. His skin was ruddy from years outdoors, but the eyes, pale blue and sharp, belonged to someone who measured everything before speaking. Collins was in his late 50s, once a state trooper before the heart attack 10 years ago forced him into slower work. He still wore the old service boots, though the shine had dulled. On his left hand, a heavy silver ring caught the fluorescent light. A family heirloom, local gossip said, from a brother who died overseas. Jack cleared his throat. "Morning, Sheriff." Collins looked up slowly from the stack of forms. "Miller, haven't seen you in a while." His voice carried that small-town drawl that could sound friendly or dangerous, depending on how it was used. "What brings you in?" "I'm looking for some old records. A missing persons case. Maple Creek, 1999. Name was David Harris." The sheriff's pen stopped mid-stroke. For a second, nothing but the hum of the radiator filled the room. Then he leaned back, crossing thick arms over his chest. "That case is ancient history. Forest fire wiped most of the area. Why dig it up?" Jack met his gaze. "Because Harris was my partner once, and I found his name at the site." Collins's jaw twitched, but he kept his voice even. "Records from that year are in storage. Nothing much to see. Man disappeared. End of story." "End of story," Jack repeated quietly, tasting the lie in the words. He noticed a faint burn scar on the sheriff's right wrist, old, circular, maybe from a lighter, and something clicked in his head, something that made the air thicken. The sheriff stood, his belt creaking. "You still chasing ghosts, Jack? Some things are better left alone, especially for men with selective memories." His tone was soft, but the warning underneath it was hard as iron. Jack left without replying. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the clouds still pressed low. Rex climbed out of the truck and sniffed the garbage can by the door. He pawed at something sticking out, a torn scrap of paper damp from the rain. Jack bent to pick it up. Faded typewritten letters bled across it. Project Recall. Back at home, he spread the scrap on the kitchen table. The phrase buzzed in his mind like static. He booted up his old laptop, its screen flickering to life with a tired hum. Hours passed as he searched. Project Recall turned out to be a declassified military program. Experimental memory suppression for returning veterans suffering trauma. The document listed 24 participants. His eyes froze on the 20th name, Miller Jack T. Phase 2 candidate. The room tilted. He gripped the edge of the table, heart thudding. So that was it. His missing memories weren't natural. They'd been taken. Harris, the fire, the mission, all buried under government therapy gone wrong, or gone right, depending on who wanted it forgotten. Outside, the night wind began to rise, brushing through the bare trees. Rex lifted his head from his bed and growled low. Jack followed the sound of tires crunching gravel outside. He crossed to the window, saw only darkness. Then, movement. A faint click of metal near the porch. He grabbed his flashlight, easing open the door. The beam caught a small glint under the railing. A miniature camera, still warm, its red light blinking. Rex lunged suddenly, barking into the dark. A figure bolted from behind the shed, tall, wearing a hooded jacket. The smell hit Jack first. Gasoline. Rex tore after him, teeth bared, but the stranger vaulted the fence and vanished into the fog. Jack knelt, breathing hard, and spotted what the intruder had dropped near the gate. A silver lighter engraved with 2 letters. CC. He turned it over in his palm, the metal still warm. Sheriff Calvin Collins. Jack's stomach dropped. Everything lined up now. The avoidance, the scar, the warning. Collins hadn't just been hiding the truth. He was part of it. Maybe even the man who'd made sure Jack forgot what really happened to Harris. Inside the cabin, the wind blew the door shut behind him with a hollow thud. Rex stood by the window, muscles tense, watching the woods. Jack set the lighter on the table beside the knife and photo. "All right," he said softly. "If he wants me to remember, we'll remember everything." The forest at Maple Creek looked different under the moonlight. Quieter, almost listening. The fog that usually hugged the ground had lifted, replaced by a thin veil of silver light that dripped from the branches. Jack Miller parked his truck by the old trailhead and cut the engine. The night was cold enough to make his breath visible, each exhale rising like smoke from a dying fire. Rex waited beside him, alert, ears pricked, tail still. The dog's silhouette looked carved from the darkness itself, muscles tense beneath his sable coat. Jack adjusted the flashlight on his jacket and checked the revolver on his hip, more for comfort than need. "You ready, partner?" he whispered. Rex gave a low bark, soft but steady, as if he understood the gravity of the night. They began the walk down the trail. The woods were a cathedral of sound, branches cracking, an owl calling somewhere high above, the faint whisper of water flowing through the creek ahead. Half a mile in, Rex suddenly froze. His nose lifted, body rigid. Then he lowered his snout to the ground, sniffing in tight circles. Jack followed as the dog pulled toward the sound of rushing water. The creek glimmered faintly, swollen from recent rain. On the far side, near a bend where roots jutted out like knuckles, the soil looked freshly disturbed. Jack's heart quickened. The ground was softer there, damp but loose. Rex started digging, his paws throwing dirt behind him in frantic bursts. Jack dropped to his knees, using his hands to help. The smell hit first, a dark, sweet rot that made his stomach lurch. After a few minutes, his fingers brushed something hard. He cleared away more soil, revealing a scrap of dark fabric clinging to what looked like bone. The flashlight trembled in his hand. He brushed aside the dirt until the shape became unmistakable. A human rib cage collapsed inward, half swallowed by mud. Rex whimpered softly, stepping back. Jack swallowed hard, forcing himself to look closer. His hand found a rusted metal tag tangled in the remnants of a strap. He wiped it clean under the moonlight. The letters stamped into the surface glinted weakly. D. Harris. Jack fell back, knees sinking into the mud. The name echoed through the trees, bouncing against the years. Harris. His partner. His friend. The man who'd vanished without a trace. For a long moment, Jack couldn't breathe. Then, as he stared at the remains, memories surged like a dam breaking. The night came back to him, not as dreams, but as sharp, brutal fragments. A safe house deep in the woods. The whistleblower they were protecting. Someone with information about an arms deal gone bad. Then gunfire. Harris shouting orders. The smell of smoke and diesel. Jack had taken a hit to the head, the world spinning. He'd turned, disoriented, saw a figure with a gun through the smoke, and fired. Once. Twice. When the haze cleared, Harris was on the ground, his eyes wide with disbelief, blood soaking the earth beneath him. Jack pressed his fists to his temples. "Oh, God," he whispered. He remembered Collins arriving later, his voice steady and cold. "You didn't see anything, Miller. You were never here." They buried Harris's body by the creek, and when the program Project Recall came calling, Collins had volunteered Jack for it. Wipe the guilt, erase the memory, preserve the Army's reputation. Now the truth lay uncovered, literal bones in the dirt. Jack's flashlight beam caught something else glinting in the hole, a bullet casing, identical to the one from the burned house. He pocketed it and sat back, trembling. Rex nudged his arm gently, eyes bright with concern. Jack let his hand rest on the dog's head. "You found him, boy," he said, voice breaking. "You found what they made me forget." The forest seemed to tighten around them, as though the trees themselves were witnesses. Somewhere in the distance, a twig snapped. Jack turned off his light instantly, crouching low. Rex growled, deep and low, for a heartbeat silence. Then faint headlights blinked through the trees near the road, someone watching. Jack waited until they disappeared, then stood slowly. He took one last look at the grave. "I'm sorry, Harris," he murmured, "but they don't get to bury you again." He gathered the tag and casing into his pocket and started back toward the truck. His decision formed with each step, solid and irreversible. Tomorrow, he would hand everything, photos, documents, the lighter, the knives, to the press in Burlington. Let the truth go where it needed to go, even if it took him down too. Behind him, the creek whispered over the stones, carrying away the night's confession. The dawn came sharp and cold, the kind of morning that seemed carved from glass. Frost glittered on the pine needles around Jack Miller's cabin, and smoke from the wood stove curled into the pale air. Jack stood by the table where the photograph, the knife, and the dog tag of D. Harris lay in a row, his confession silent but unflinching. Beside him, Rex paced with quiet tension, ears flicking toward every distant sound. Jack had barely slept. He had written a letter to the Burlington Tribune, sealing inside it the truth. The photos, the lighter engraved CC, a copy of the Project Recall documents. It sat on the counter, ready to mail. The growl of engines shattered the stillness. Jack's head lifted. Outside, through the frosted window, he saw shapes moving, figures in dark uniforms, their cars idling on the road, red and blue lights flashing muted colors against the snow. Sheriff Collins had come. He stepped outside, boots crunching. The cold bit through his jacket, the air smelling faintly of oil and pine resin. The deputies spread out in a semicircle, hands hovering near holsters. And then Collins emerged from behind one of the SUVs. The sheriff looked older than he had the day before, eyes sunken, skin drawn tight as paper. His uniform was buttoned to the throat, hat brim low, and his right hand held a service pistol that glinted in the morning light. "You shouldn't have gone back to that creek, Jack," he said quietly. "You should have left it buried." Jack's breath clouded in the air. "So you finally came yourself?" "I didn't want it this way," Collins said, voice trembling for the first time. "But I can't let you drag this town, or the department, through the mud. People wouldn't understand. They need to believe their protectors were clean." Jack took one step forward, slow and deliberate. "You're not protecting them, Sheriff. You're protecting yourself." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the creased photo of the 3 soldiers. He held it out between them. "You remember this, don't you? You were there when it went wrong. You told me Harris turned on us, but it was a lie. He died because of me, and you covered it up to keep your badge clean." Collins's jaw worked, his breath fogging. For a moment, his face twisted with something like shame, but it hardened again. "I did what I had to do," he said. "You were falling apart. You would have confessed, ruined everything. The government needed silence, so they wiped you clean." He raised the gun. "Now you're going to stay silent." Rex barked, low and warning. Jack didn't move, his eyes steady on the man he'd once called brother-in-arms. "You can't shoot the truth, Calvin," he said. "You've been trying to for 25 years, but it's still here. In that creek. In me. In him." He nodded toward the horizon, where the forest shimmered faintly in the morning light. Collins' hand shook. "Don't make me do this." Jack spread his arms slightly. "Then don't." The gun went off once. The sound cracked through the air like thunder. Jack staggered backward, a burning sting tearing across his shoulder. Rex lunged forward in a blur of motion, teeth flashing. The dog slammed into Collins, knocking him off balance. The pistol skittered across the frost. Collins fell, his head striking the gravel. Deputies shouted, rushing in as Rex stood over the sheriff, snarling, chest heaving. "Rex!" Jack called weakly. The German shepherd turned at once, padding back to his master, muzzle flecked with frost. Jack pressed a hand against his bleeding shoulder and nodded to the deputies. "Get him medical help," he muttered. 2 of them grabbed Collins, who now sat slumped, dazed, the gun far from reach. The man's eyes met Jack's, filled with something that looked too much like relief. "You were right," Collins whispered. "We all just wanted to forget." Hours later, after the ambulance lights faded and the deputies left, the cabin stood silent again. Snow began to fall, soft flakes settling on the porch rail. Jack sat outside, his arm bandaged, watching the forest. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his boot. In the yard, a simple wooden cross rose from the frozen ground, carved with careful letters. David Harris. Brother, soldier, truth never dies. Jack set the repaired photograph against the base of the cross. The 3 soldiers smiled in the sunlight of another life. The wind picked up, stirring the edges of the picture, and the faintest warmth touched Jack's face. He looked down at Rex. "We did it, boy," he murmured. "He's home now." The dog gave a soft, contented whine and rested his head again. The forest whispered around them, the truth no longer buried, but free at last. Some wounds don't bleed, Jack said quietly to the wind. But when you face them, they finally start to heal. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder or light. They come quietly, through truth, forgiveness, and the courage to face what we once ran from. Jack didn't just find the bones of his past. He found redemption. And maybe, just maybe, that was God's way of reminding us that no truth stays buried forever, and no soul is too lost to be found again. If you've ever carried guilt, regret, or pain in silence, remember, God still sees you, and He's waiting to turn your wounds into healing. Take a moment today to forgive yourself or someone you've lost, because every act of honesty, every moment of compassion, that's where miracles begin. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Comment below your thoughts or a prayer for those who carry heavy memories. And if you believe that truth and faith can still change lives, subscribe to our channel so together we can keep sharing stories that heal souls and remind the world God still works in quiet ways. May the Lord bless you and everyone you love, wherever you are tonight.